Hello there. This month, I've been spotlighting members of a family of educators, and today we conclude with Kelli. Her story resonates deeply with me, reflecting much of what I've experienced in public education, more so than her parents' stories. And I've been reflecting on why this is. Both Kelli and I started teaching when the profession had already become overwhelmingly challenging, unlike when her parents began their careers, a time when teaching was more respected and manageable. Perhaps it's this shared starting point that gives Kelli and me a different perspective. However, what truly unites our experiences is something far more disturbing. We've both faced the chilling reality of a student wishing us harm. In the second part of this episode, Kelli will share her personal encounter with this frightening issue. Unfortunately, such threats and acts of violence against educators are becoming all too frequent. I'll repeat this message at the beginning of both parts of Kelli's episode. While Kelli provides her firsthand narrative, my story is fictionalized in my book. However, even after 5 years, I know that running into the student who once wished me harm would still cause a sinking feeling in my stomach, make me shake, and likely bring me to tears. So it is fair to say I am still affected by it to some degree, as is she. In our current educational climate, educators must take these threats seriously, yet we often face accusations of overreacting when we do. But can we truly overreact to the fear of being physically harmed or even killed? I believe we are underreacting, both as an educational system and as a society, by expecting educators to endure this as a routine aspect of their profession. If this has been a portion of your personal experience, please see today's show notes for resources to help with the long-term effects of trauma.
What is the role of the parent in this educational setting? Because the parent plays a role, and I just don't feel like we treat it like that. And so I think that we can support teachers better as soon as we have that accountability for all parties involved. Students, yes, but especially parents, because that's where it starts, is at home with the parents.
A few years ago, I started writing a fictitious story based on my time as an educator. It is called Taught, and the story was partially inspired out of anger and frustration fueled by burnout. Okay, actually it was more than partially inspired by anger and frustration. But Taught has also become a vehicle for me to tell what I thought at the time, and in some ways continue to think, was and is the real story of teaching. I now realize that my perspective is not everyone's perspective, but there are some pieces of Taught that resonated with many educators. This podcast is an extension of that story, and I, a former teacher, will interview other educators asking them to share how they really feel about the current state of education. Why are so many teachers burn out? Why are so many, like me, leaving the field? We likely won't solve any problems or come up with any solutions, but we can create a community of voices that maybe begin the conversation around how educators can take back teaching. I'm Melissa LaFleur. Welcome to Taught, the podcast. A note for listeners, this is Kelli's second part of her interview. If you missed the first part, it is episode 11. You might want to stop here, go back and give that one a listen, then come back and hear today's episode. So you mentioned student behavior, and I will say across the board in every interview that I've done, every year that I've worked in education, I want to say that the behaviors have not gotten better. They've escalated. About the time I think I am not going to have a student whose behavior tops what's going on right now the next year they do. I get a
Yes.
kiddo that is just, and sometimes it's because of things that are beyond their control, and I want to acknowledge that. But I'm going to go ahead and start our three for the road. You and I have already
Okay.
talked a little bit about what we're going to talk about here because I know we have a shared experience. But let's start with number one, which is if you could change one thing about education, and maybe at this point, not even for yourself, just in general, what would you, it's a magic wand. What would you change?
Mhm. I I think that what I would change is the lack of support for teachers. Man, if I could choose, I feel like every time I think of okay, what would I change? I have like a number of things that I would love to change, but um, I think to maybe with the support of teachers, also to hold parents accountable. Teachers are held accountable every single year for many different reasons, for many different things, and it just doesn't seem like we're bringing parents into that conversation. um, where we are having parent meetings, or we're coming up with improvement plans for students behavior together, or um, or even just getting kids to get their work turned in. I just feel like the accountability piece is just not there. Um, and that's probably the biggest. I know for me this past year and moving into a new school, that's been the biggest issue. Has been grading work, and then just the amount of parent pushback, and that it just doesn't seem like our administration is aware, that the district office is aware, or isn't aware, or wants to turn a blind eye to, what is the role of the parent in this educational setting, because the parent plays a role, and I just don't feel like we treat it like that. And so I think that we can support teachers better as soon as we have that accountability, for all parties involved. Students, yes, but especially parents, because that's where it starts, is at home with the parents.
I agree. You know, when I went to work in the other districts that I worked in, one of them they had received some funding to start up family engagement programs. And I know lots of districts have gone on to do this, but I was sent to a training. And one of the things that they recommended was to have a potluck. And see, we can't even do this stuff anymore because of the pandemic. Now everybody's worried about sharing food and all the
Mm,
ways that we can get sued. But I did it one year. I brought parents in, and so I had a really good turnout. Of course, it was self-contained classroom, right? So
mm,
this, I don't know how well this, maybe if I had done each class in middle school, like one a month or something. But we would bring in food, and then I would go over some little silly study skill. I would give the parents the research while they were eating and say, this is what we know happens when you sit down and you do 10 minutes of math every night with your kiddos. Here are some resources. Talk to each other. What are some things that you think you could do to bring some of these into your routine? Because these are the reasons we don't. We have soccer practice, we have this and that, and parents would talk to each other and then they would give each other ideas. And it was not about
mm,
me telling them you need to do this, but it was about them talking to each other. And I think that built in the accountability that you're talking about. Because then
mhm,
when they see each other in the pickup drop off line, or they see each other at the grocery store, they're like, oh, have you been doing this thing with your kiddo at home? I tried this. This didn't work for me. What do you do? But they were
mm,
holding each other accountable. And we did see some very positive gains that year. Unfortunately, like I said, there are lots of hurdles to us having those engagement pieces now. And there were many others that our particular school did. A lot of them were around getting families in that weren't getting their basic needs met. But
mm.
just imagine if we built in some things like that where we could set up expectations in a non-authoritarian way where families from the get-go were told, this is what we're doing this school year. This is what we will be expecting from you. And everybody's doing it. I think you're
Mhm.
100% correct that having that accountability piece would be a magic wand
Mhm.
because kids would feel like we're all on the same page.
Yeah. And that's what that's what I was taught whenever I was going through my education classes, was that the parent and the teacher need to be on the same playing field. We are on the same team because we both want, their student to be successful. And I really feel like, I've had parents over the years, especially in my old school where I was there for 9 years. And so parents knew me. I had siblings. That I really feel like specifically over the pandemic and how upset parents were with students having to sit at home, and rightfully so. I understand that. We started seeing teachers as the enemy because we are the faces of the district that we're coming into, on the screens every single day, and that has not been fixed. There's nothing since then that has been addressed to make it so that, hey, I'm in your child's best interest. I am working, to try to help your student understand these concepts to get them prepared, eventually for high school. And then beyond, have some of these foundational, parts to their education to be taught to them. I'm not out to get them. I'm not out to make them fail. And I just feel like that is really that's more of the rule and not the exception to the rule with parents anymore. And that's honestly, I feel like I have felt very much in the kind of this combative state this past year, specifically because of that, where parents are angry with me about students' grades or what's going on in the classroom. I don't like them because their grades are low, or because I've had a conversation with them after class about their behavior, and that I'm seen like I'm the villain, instead of like I am working in your child's best interest.
So, because of the nature of what we do, we witness tragedy and trauma frequently. Sometimes it's even our own. And so I'd like you to tell me about one of these situations that you have gone through as an educator, and it is to your comfort level.
Hmm. Um, yeah, so when my third year of teaching, which probably up to this year I would consider to be my worst, um, because at that point I hadn't had behaviors as bad, and it just seemed like it was a massive storm that year of bad behaviors, and then also as a new teacher, just in my third year, not having to deal with those behaviors or issues, I didn't have necessarily a great grip on controlling my emotions in the classroom. And so I think throughout that year, that played a huge role in it. I just got so angry at students on a daily basis for not following the instructions. And I think my classroom management wasn't, um, you know, probably at the best place that it could be, with removing emotions and out of the classroom. And so anyway, that whole year was terrible. Student issue after student issue, and just bad behaviors all year long. And then we got to the spring semester, or in fourth quarter, and in fourth quarter we always do this research paper, this project that I have. It's called the iSearch, and we're introduction to research, and it's a difficult project, and for kids, because they have never had to write an actual research paper where they're putting in multiple sources, in text citations. So there were a lot of frustrations and a lot of emotions that were flying during that time. And a big part of that was to also learn to not plagiarize. And so there was, there were a couple of kids that year that I think there were probably a handful that had plagiarized their paper, just went to Wikipedia or some source like that, um, highlighted information, copied and pasted it into a paper. And my policy at that time was, if I find the plagiarism, I let parents know it's a 0 in the grade book and they can't really make it up because this is a big deal to plagiarize. So, anyway, during that time, whenever I had found that out and updating grades, and I had a couple of kids that were failing, um, I used to do the morning announcements at that time. So I would go up to the front office and I would pick up the script. So this is before, online technology. So I get like a paper copy of it. And so I was going up quickly to go grab the paper copy of the script to head all the way back down to the library media center where we would record these announcements. So I grabbed my script and I just remember, like, in this flash, I was walking by the principal's office and walking by the SRO's office, and the SRO stopped me and said, "Hey, can you come in?" And I'm thinking, like, this is bizarre. I'm thinking, like, did I do something wrong? Like, did I park my car somewhere wrong, or did I get a traffic violation that I wasn't aware of? Like, so got called into his office and he shut the door, and then he handed me a packet of a text message exchange. And so and just kind of started talking about, you know, we don't but it kind of jumped right into the middle of a conversation that I was not brought in on, and was not told of, and had found out, I think maybe a week or two beforehand. There were two male students, who were put into 10 days of OSS, and no notification to the teachers as to what happened. What are we supposed to do with this? Like, this is a big infraction whenever it's 10 days OSS, because we know that 10 days equals like pending a hearing to even return into the classroom. So two of my students had gotten OSS, and the only thing that we were notified of was on the referral there was something that said threats, and but no notice from my admin at all about what this was. And so we're just going along, and I'm emailing with these two students, for about a week or so, um their homework and checking in with them and that kind of thing. And so anyway, going to that conversation with my SRO, in the middle of this conversation, he's like, so we don't think that these threats are, that there's anything that's really serious about them. I interrogated them and they were really, scared about it. So I don't really think that there was an actual threat to it, but I just wanted to let you know, like, this is what was going on. So as he's telling me this, I'm reading through the packet of text messages, and it's these three boys that are talking about, hating the homework and hating the research paper. And there was something to do with, like, math as well. And they're overwhelmed with all of their homework. And then we get to this, there's like this point where it says, well, I should just shoot up the school. Yeah, we should just shoot up the school. Yeah, it's a great idea. And then they said, on my team, math teachers first, and then ELA, me, I'm second. And but actually, like, listed our names in it. And I remember at that time, like, my heart like, it just dropped for me, because I was like, what is this? Like, I have been emailing these students, and this one in particular has wished me dead. And I think that's something that, for me, that was that realization that, like, not only are we angry about an assignment or whatever, like, it's gone beyond that. And so it was just so surreal to sit there, and I was shaking, and I knew that I wasn't going to be able to do the morning announcements after that. And actually, I think that I missed the morning announcements altogether, so I think somebody else had done them. But I just remember him, like, kind of in this jumble, was like, I don't think that there are any threats, but if you want to press charges, you're welcome to do that, but I really just don't think that it's really serious. And this was at the start of the school day. And so I went back to my classroom, and I mean, I was just shaking the whole way back, and I had to take some deep breaths. And I remember texting my family. I remember texting my parents about it, and they were like, "What the heck? Like, where did this come from?" And so that whole conversation of, well, pending the hearing, after the 10 days of OSS for these two boys that were, um that these threats were reported, from the third boy who was in, that group text message exchange, they could possibly come back into the classroom. And I remember kind of having in a bit of a panic, like, I don't want him back in my room. And I remember talking to a friend who was a teacher, who I really valued his, um, his advice. And he just said that, if that kid ever came back, that I should just walk out of the building and not come back myself, because I don't feel safe. And so, they ended up having um their hearing, and they were expelled for the remainder of the school year. um and my admin wanted to have a parent meeting with the two boys there, and the two teachers who, they wanted to kill, in their text message exchange. And he wanted the boys to have like a formal apology. And I just remember, like, going down during that time. I felt so uncomfortable, but this was a way to smooth over, the whole event, was to have the boys apologize. And so one of the boys who had mentioned that the math teacher seemed sincere in his apology, and the other boy who had mentioned my name, was like, yeah, I'm sorry. And just like, because he's forced to apologize. And I remember being able to ask, like, well, why would you say something like that? And he couldn't. He's middle schooler, he couldn't respond. um, but he was angry because he had plagiarized his paper, and he was one of the children who had plagiarized the paper, got a zero on it, and had failed for that quarter. And he was just so angry about it, and that's why my name had come up. And I just remember thinking at the time, like, I understand being frustrated or upset by it, but to wish someone dead, like to wish me dead because you made the decision, like you decided to plagiarize your own paper, it was just baffling to me. So that whole apology meeting was really supposed to be smoothing everything over. The other teacher did not press charges, so I didn't want to, I guess, maybe seem like I was overreacting, maybe, by also pressing charges. I will say that that student works at a sandwich shop, in that town, and I still work there. So when we have PD days, we actually had, one this year where we show up at the sandwich shop, and I'm hoping that this kid is not working there. And then I see him come to the front desk, and I had this moment of, like, I told my coworkers, I was like, I'm gonna have to go somewhere else. I really never want to see him again. And even he came back like that next year into eighth grade, and he was in yearbooks. So there were a couple of times that he came back into my room. I didn't want him there. And I think that's kind of where, um, anytime I even think of his name or see him or something like that, it sparks this, um, kind of I just get kind of shaky again and that kind of thing.
Yeah,
So,
it's a post-traumatic stress response. And I think that far too many of these incidences occur. And it doesn't sound like your district swept this under the rug per se, because the students had probably what the maximum, disciplinary measure was. Having said that, I think this is all way too normalized in education right now. And we have these horrible things that happen, and everybody wants to have answers for why. Well, here's the answers right here. What your story is is sharing are those answers. We have students who can't regulate their emotions because they think that somebody doing something that they don't agree with is on the same level as defending their lives. They feel that they can go to great lengths to be vindicated.
Hmm.
And it's not just a few of them, it's a lot of them that have this disconnect, and they're still developing. They are still maturing, becoming the people that they're going to be. And so it's good that in my opinion, that these students got this lesson. Having said that, we have more and more of them coming through. And I, from my personal experience and hearing other educator stories, there is, we need to have balance. We need to have balance with this is a developing human being and have some grace for that. But we also really need to draw some very firm lines. It goes back to the accountability thing that we talked about, because all too often, we as educators, and there's a lot of paras that end up having these kinds of things happen as well, are made to feel that being threatened and injured is just a part of the job now. It's not. Our job is to educate children. It is not to be threatened. It is not to be physically assaulted. No part of this is in our job description. But I do want to thank you for sharing that, because I have some personal connections with that, and I know other people who do too. And far too often, it used to
Hmm.
be, wow. And I'll use an example from my classroom. I had a student bring a knife to school, and it was specifically to threaten another student, and it was a huge knife. Far too often, I tell that story, and someone has a story like yours. Or
Hmm.
they have a story of, oh, well, I had a kid actually bring a gun to school. Fortunately, it wasn't loaded. Or, and I'm just drugs. That's another one that I hear pretty frequently. Oh, yeah, this kid brought
Hmm.
in, this bag of cocaine. And I'm thinking, how can it be? I mean, my circle of friends is not huge, yet I am hearing this type of thing all the time.
Hmm.
And again, people being physically assaulted. So,
I think it goes um anymore it goes hand in hand with the job, but it's just funny because it's not what we've ever talked about in my classes to become an educator. Even how to handle or manage or deal with an incident like this,
right.
where yeah, and that's that. It doesn't it I don't really think anything can prepare you, but these are not conversations that we were having as pre-service teachers, that these things do happen. They happen all too frequently. um
And we have
yeah.
people not wanting to go to school to become teachers. I mean,
Yes.
there's a reason. There's a reason
Yeah.
people don't want to get into the field.
Well, and when we do active shooter training every year, and we've done this like the past couple of years where we do active shooter training, it is this idea that, hey, you are the teacher, you should put yourself in harm's way, because this is a part of who you are as a teacher. It's like, but we also have families, we
Yeah.
also have lives. I'm not just a teacher, you know and that seems to be, with threats that are given, or preparations that we have to have as teachers to prepare for um an active shooter situation, that we should be putting, to be prepared to put our lives on the line for our jobs. And I just
Yeah.
I don't think that that's necessarily happening, with other professions. So
No, it's definitely not. And the example I gave in my book was, we're not expecting members of the military to teach kids how to read and write.
hmm,
So
yeah.
why am I being expected to defend the whole school?
Right.
But yeah. Okay. To balance out the trauma. Kids are pretty funny. What's one of the funniest things you've experienced during your time as an educator?
Um, it's funny to try to narrow down a time, because there have been some really funny, instances and things that have happened like over the years. But I think one that stood out in my mind, when I was, first thinking about a funny time was, a few years ago, probably in my favorite year of teaching, with just some really great creative, just really, really wonderful kids. They took a personal interest in, my life as a middle schooler. And so I thought, it was just it's really funny how they wanted to know who I was when I was in seventh grade. And so I told them, you guys would not find me cool. I wore like the baggy pants and the chains and I consider myself to be a punk, so I would dye my hair and wear the wristbands, and they thought it was the funniest thing and like the coolest thing. And so we built up, like, all year long, we built up this whole, like, oh, she's a punk, she's emo and all this kind of stuff. And so, we made it this big thing in the classroom all year long. And the kids wanted to see some pictures from that era. And so I had to go back into, the recesses of all of my folders and try to find something. So I found like a couple of really embarrassing pictures where I've got the digital camera and my hair was all like swiped over my face, and it was pretty embarrassing. So I put it into a PowerPoint slide, and on the last day of school, because the kids had been asking about it, I was like, okay, the time is now. And it's finally time for you to see, Miss, as this seventh grade punk. And so the response, I think, was probably most funny to me, that I just thought was hilarious. They're giving the drum roll and everything. And then I put the pictures up on the board, and everybody in the class just stood up, and they're all just like giving this round of applause, and they're like, wow, that's like really embarrassing. And I was like, I know everybody has stages, everybody has phases of life. But I just remember that being like one of my favorite, just like funny times, was the ongoing joke all year to lead up to like finding these very embarrassing pictures that the kids just thought were hilarious. So
And what a fabulous lesson for them that who you are today isn't necessarily who you are tomorrow. And we've
mm,
all got our stuff,
yeah.
not just them.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I have a bonus question for you.
Okay.
Hopefully your parents didn't tell you about it. So here's the scenario. You go into the staff room, you need to get some water, but the sink is full of dirty dishes. Whose responsibility is it to do those dishes?
I think my first thought is the responsibility of the person who made those dirty dishes,
I agree.
probably.
But what if they don't? Does this happen in your building? Do you go in
Yes.
there and there's dirty dishes?
I actually avoid the staff room, but if I was going in there and there were a stack of dirty dishes, that I mean, I would want to help. I guess I would want to help out and make sure that the staff room is taken care of. And I know that in years past, when I was going in the staff room, making sure that things were put away, and cleaned up. And usually the coworkers that I had worked with in the past would take care of things like that. Um, but yeah, I think that might be my answer.
I'm doing an informal poll here. And that was
Hmm.
a very community minded answer, Kelly. And you're doing better
Hmm.
than the rest of us because usually we're like, oh no, I'm not doing the dishes. That's how I feel. I'm like, those are not my dishes. I am not doing them. I will dig a well and get my water that way. Anyway, so
What's funny is I think in the past, my answer would be to help out, for the good of the cause. And as cynical as it sounds, I would probably lean, in these past couple of years, especially, like, yeah, that's not my responsibility.
Yeah. I have really enjoyed talking to you. Is there anything else that you'd like to share before we end this?
Um, I don't think so. I mean, it makes me sad. Like you said, there's a grieving process to leave the classroom, and there are some really sweet moments. Even though they are very few and far between, um, that will make me miss this kind of teaching. But I think it's something that I've spent a lot of time talking with friends, with my husband, about that. It's leaving the classroom doesn't necessarily mean I'm not going to be a teacher anymore. I'm just not going to be a public school teacher. I can still teach in other capacities, and that's what I really hope to do in the future, becoming, maybe a school librarian or even just a public librarian, is getting to teach, but in a different capacity, and one where a a balance, a good work-life balance, a good um, way to support my mental health, my physical health, and just like the health of our family overall. I'm really, really, honestly, I'm looking forward to that. So it's very bittersweet leaving the classroom, but it's also really sweet knowing, like, teaching, I can teach in a different capacity.
I wish I knew.
Today's episode was produced and edited by me. The theme music is by Otis McDonald featuring Joni Inez. If you know someone who might enjoy these conversations, please share the podcast episodes as much and as often as you can. It's as simple as copying the link you use to access today's episode and sending it in a message or sharing it on social media. I'm a small, independent operation, and your shares broaden our audience. Perhaps you or someone you know will be inspired to talk about teacher burnout. If you would like to get your voice on my podcast, contact me via the link on my webpage, taught.buzzsprout.com. Coach, speaker, and author Rashid Ogunlaru said, "It may take many voices for people to hear the same message." Join me in being one of the many voices rising up to get the message out around educator burnout. This is Melissa LaFleur. Thank you for listening to Taught, the podcast.
I wish I knew.